Hello, good afternoon, guys. Go ahead and join the Nearpod there. We're switching back because I just feel like it worked easier last time for us. So as you can see there on the screen, I have the live code for you. So join that one right now. But then if you want to write down the review code for to go over, or if you miss a question or don't have time, want to do some extra stuff, some games or some practice later, you can just write down that review code. But for now, let's all join the live one so that we can do it together. But we'll give everyone a few minutes. Once you join the Nearpod, you'll see there's kind of like a little intro question. So you can go ahead and answer that as people are coming in. So again, if you're not sure where to access it, you just go to join.nearpod.com and you'll type in that code there. All right, I got one person on there. Daya, awesome. So hopefully everyone is finding their way over there. Please make sure you're entering the live code so that you can follow along with us. You can just write down the review code for later. I liked it too. It was very confusing with the other one. And I was, they had wanted us to try it and I was like, I think I'll go back to the tried and true one. I just know it better. I feel stronger about using it. So as usual, go ahead and join that live one. You can always write down the review code for later. It's up till the end of May, so you can go through and practice. There's always a little bit more activities, some games. You can also just take your time with the questions when we don't always have time to do that here. All right. Okay, I'm getting people's answers now in the Nearpod. Awesome. So as you're joining, go ahead and put the 3 adjectives to describe your mood today. That is the intro question on the Nearpod if you're there, just to like get us warmed up. For 5, yes, we did have one for last time. I will look it up, or Harrison will look it up once he jumps in, and I'll give that to you. Yes, I did tell him it, but yeah, it wasn't posted here, but there is one. So please remind me if I forget, but Harrison knows the code, so you could definitely ask him after as well. Okay, so there's a lot of people feeling stressed. This seems to be the main adjective. That's not good. Oh, yay, someone just got accepted to a college. That's awesome. But too many people are stressed. That's no good. Luckily, though, it seems like even if you are stressed, it also seems like you're happy. So it seems like you're able to exist in both worlds at the moment. You're both stressed and happy. So I suppose as long as you're able to handle it, then you're okay. You're good to go. All right. Awesome. Okay. So I've got about like 15 people on that live Nearpod, but the code is always going to be there at the bottom of each slide. So if you haven't joined yet, or if you're jumping in a little bit later, it will always live in the bottom of pretty much each screen. So you'll be able to hop over there as well and just join kind of at any point. So please don't join the review one for now, because you'll want to do the one live with us so we can talk through the questions together. But I did just want to put it there so you have it for later. Awesome. Okay. Thank you for your adjectives. We may as well jump in. It is a little after 2. Okay. So we are going to do cities and urban land use today. There is a whole heck of a lot of models and a lot going on, but we are going to get through it. We're going to do an amazing job. We are ready. Okay, so here we go. Let me move over. All right. So once again, we are being recorded. This is our calendar, just another update really quick. So our next one, we're switching back to the evening times. And so it will be the 16th at 8 p.m. And then after that, we have the next 2 are going to be more FRQ based and kind of tips and tricks and kind of how to work your way through that, leading to our big finale there on May 5th. So we have one more kind of content session, and then we've got some FRQ focus with one big review finale session at the end. Okay, our trivia dates again. So we have one tomorrow at 5:30. And then as a reminder, since we switched back, the questions again in the Nearpod are labeled A to Z. So I open the Q&A. So while we're going through the questions, if you got one wrong or there's something you want to talk about more, you can just put the letter of the question in the Q&A. So if you got question B wrong, instead of having to remember the content of it, you can just drop the letter in the Q&A, and then we know that's something we really want to talk about. And then you can upvote it if you also got it wrong or want to talk about it more, anything like that. All right, so we are going to be talking about all of these things: urban decay, the size of cities, the structure of cities. This unit, like I had mentioned, is very, very model based. So we'll be going through lots of different models and people that created the models, all the pros and cons, lots of terms. So let's get going with that. Okay. So we are going to look at how does physical geography and resources impact the growth of cities. We're going to look at the landscape, as well as how the urban areas are designed and how that's influenced by the political, cultural, economic forces within a city, and kind of what challenges that may bring and what solutions that we maybe have to offer, and how we can use these urban design ideas to make the world a better place. So we shall go through it. And again, if you have yet to hop on that Nearpod code, it lives there at the bottom of the screen. Just make sure you join the live code. All right, so our vocab, again, there's lots of models in this unit in particular, especially with the city models, which I'm sure you know and love. So we're going to be going through a lot of those, all the different types of models, as well as the central place theory. That's a big one that comes up as well. So the central place theory and all the city models we'll be spending most of our time on. But then there's some other terms that come up very often, things like gentrification and redlining, gravity model, primate city rule, and rank size rule. So we'll make sure we touch mostly on those. All right, so here we go. The origin and influence of urbanization. So this is a reminder of the two terms we looked at before. So ways that we describe modern cities is by site and situation. We have mentioned these two terms before. They come up all the time, but as a reminder, site is the physical characteristics of a place. So that's vegetation, elevation, climate, things that are physical. And then situation is things that are relative to the location itself. So this might be if it's near a recognizable street or a recognizable restaurant, or it's near another town that you can describe something with. So we've got site and situation. We have heard those terms before. All right, so we'll start by looking at one of our models about urban growth. So we're going through the epochs of urban growth, which basically just describe each different time period in history and then what was going on in terms of growth and technology in those specific time frames. They're fairly obvious in terms of the order that they go, because we kind of know the development. Like, we know that a plane would come after the invention of the car. That kind of makes sense to us. But they are put down in these, what we call epochs, which is a division of time. So let's first see if we can try and match them up. So I put the matching up here, but if you're on the Nearpod, you're physically matching them up over there. So go ahead and match our epochs up. I bet you will do a great job at this. This isn't too tricky, but might as well practice. So what time frame goes with what development? Okay, I see a lot of people have started already and are flying through these matches. These are not that tricky, but you're getting a chance to practice. Awesome. Yeah, you guys are going so fast, it almost like doesn't even show up that you're doing it. It's just 5 out of 5, done. Wow, yeah, you guys are fast. Okay. I'll give you another about like 45 seconds to get this one done. Okay, it's like most people are almost done matching these up. Okay, great. So we know that we started with our sail And then wagons, we went to the iron horse, steel rail, auto air, and high tech. But it looks like you guys all figured that out, and I'll put that up here on the next slide. Great. Okay, I see that you're matching them up, but again, I'm sorry if I have to cut you off if you're in the middle of making your matches, but we're going to move forward. That's why we have that review code if you want to go back and kind of try this again. All right, here's our stages. So we have the sail, wagon, sail meaning like boat, water-based, iron horse, so that's steam, the steel rail, railways, then we get to the air and the auto industry, and then we're finally where we're at today. The model technically stops in the 70s, but it can still be applied to what's going on now. We might just eventually have to add another epoch, perhaps. But right now, we're at the mass transit, biking, walking, kind of eco-friendly and high technology. All right. Okay, as usual, we have 3 questions on Nearpod. I have them up here on the screen as well. So we're starting with question A. So again, once we go over the answers, if you are stumped more, you want to talk about one doesn't make sense, make sure you just drop the question letter into the Q&A for Harrison so that he can talk about it later. And yes, this is recorded. So if you wanted to watch this later, then you would also log in with that review code so that you could be doing the Nearpod on your own while perhaps watching the re-record if you'd like. But again, please use that Q&A there for Harrison if you have any questions once I show you the answers. If you want to talk about them more, just go ahead and drop the letter of the question. But I'm going to give you 2 more minutes. And then I will put the answers up here on my screen as well as the Nearpod, but I want to give you a chance to try it out first. But I know these multiple choice questions, we go through them pretty quickly. So if you want more time to kind of sit with it and really think about these questions and read them on your own, you'll definitely want to log into that review code later because we just go a little bit too fast. Okay, looks like we're almost done over here on the Nearpod, about 30 more seconds. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the answers here as people are finishing here in the Nearpod. So for this one, for a site characteristic, for the most part, those are not man-made because it's something about the land or the landscape itself. So if you think about a site characteristic as something that is not man-made, my only option for this one is natural harbor. Everything else is man-made. And so if I'm describing the site of an area, I'm probably describing a water, river, something like elevation, topography, climate, things that are not man-made. So my answer is natural harbor. And then my next one, the greatest number of urban dwellers are found in Asia. So again, I'm going through these quickly, but again, if you want to talk about these with Harrison in the Discord, you would just drop the letter of the question in the Q&A, and then we will know to circle back to it. I also revealed the answers on the Nearpod. And then lastly, I know this one was a little bit long, so you probably didn't have full time to read, but the answer to this one is Tokyo, Osaka, Nagasaki. And again, I wish I could talk about each of these in detail, but we don't have time. So if this is something you want to talk about, drop the letter C into the Q&A and Harrison will get to it. Alrighty. So we're going to look at cities around the world, things that they do to drive urbanization, and just some of the key terms. So these are just key definitions that come up when we're talking about how a city is arranged and how a city is set up. So we have suburbanization, the idea of people moving to the suburbs. We kind of know what that means. We've got decentralization, so that's the opposite. The Q&A, it's open. I think you just click Q&A. I see some people are dropping their questions in there, which is awesome. And if you want to upvote a question, so someone already put question B and C, if you also agree, you can upvote that one, and Harrison will make sure he talks about that. I'm not sure on your end how you can access it, but it should just be over to the left. Okay, so then we have edge cities, which is exactly how they sound, luckily, cities on the edge. Exurbs, small communities laying beyond a suburb, and boomburgs, rapidly growing. Those are just some key terms there. Luckily, the names are a little bit, they're pretty descriptive, so you can kind of figure out what they mean. Oops, I went too fast, sorry. And then we have our megacities. So where are these huge cities around the world? Where are the biggest populations? So we've got megacities and meta-cities. Those are actually two different things. So a meta-city contains a megacity and several other large satellite cities. And then the megacity are the ones with very large population. So in the United States, we have New York City. That's where I am. And then we have Los Angeles. Those are our two. And thank you guys for helping each other out there in the chat. You guys are the greatest. And then we have them all around the world. So these are the 20 largest cities are there on the map. You can see those. It's the ones you obviously have heard of and know of. Okay. We're flying through it. So let's see if we can answer 3 more. So these will be D, E, and F. So again, as we go over the answers, isn't a metacity 20 million or plus? I'm not sure if there's an exact number to it, but a metacity would be a megacity and then with very large cities surrounding it. I'm not sure, honestly, if 20 million is the exact amount they're looking for, but it would make sense if it was larger than a megacity because it contains a megacity. So if a megacity is about 10 million, then if you include all the extra cities around it, I can see a metacity being at least 20 million. Awesome. Okay. Looks like we're starting over there in the Nearpod. Good start, guys. And again, I know these multiple choice questions are hard to do super quick, but we are trying our best. You can always go back through it and spend a little bit more time fully reading them. I definitely recommend that. All right, so I'm just going to go through them kind of one at a time. So it looks like most people are past number 1. So the growth of the North American suburbs was constrained, meaning historically what had stopped the suburbs from growing as much as they were going to. So constrained means to stop. So our answer here is limited transportation. So until the addition of the subway lines and public transportation and buses and biking got better, people weren't really able to live that far outside of the major city because you couldn't get anywhere. Okay, the next one, I know this one's like a long thing to read. These are all questions from the AP test, so of course they're wordy, so we don't always have time to fully process these, but this will be a good one to go back and look for, but that answer is manufacturing zones. Again, if you just want to talk about that in more details, we just don't have time now, drop E in that Q&A. I know Harrison will help you out. And then the last one was the primary reason for the rapid growth of megacities in the developing world. Interregional migration, so people moving within the regions of a country. Okay, so that was D, E, and F. I'm sure you got questions on those, so go ahead and drop that in the Q&A. And you can upvote it if you're also like, that made no sense. Harrison's got you. Okay. All right, we're going to look at how cities go through globalization and look at the different levels of how large a city is and look at the primate cities and rank size city rules. First things first, see if we can fill in the blank from largest to smallest. Which one of those is the largest all the way down to the smallest? So go ahead on the Nearpod over there, fill in the blanks. Awesome. Looks like you guys got it over there. You are figuring out our sizes. Great. Okay, so perfect. You guys are almost done over there. You're filling it in. So our largest one, meta city, second largest, mega city. Then a city would be the third largest in terms of descriptions. And then we go down to town, and then village, and then hamlet. So hamlet would be the smallest. And then meta city is the largest. Okay. So just like I mentioned there, they increase in size on the way up. They decrease in frequency. So that means that there are less meta cities than there are mega cities, but then that means there are a lot of hamlets. And not that many of the ones at the top because they're just so big. Okay. Now we're going to start looking at those ranking size rules and all those different concepts with how to describe the size of cities. So these always come up. Let's talk these through. Okay, we got the rank size rule of how a country is organized. Oh, thank you guys. You guys are the best. You're like all figuring it out in there for each other. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Okay, so the rank size rule means that each country is essentially double the size of the one before it, or if you're going the other way around, half. So it says a country's second largest city would be half the size of the largest city. So if a country's largest city, right, you can see the example is 100,000, the second largest is 50,000, and then 25,000, and then 12.5 thousand. It just kind of halves itself, like as if you were doing half-life in science or something like that. And then the primate city rule would be a country who has basically one super large city and then just other very smaller ones. So nothing would compare to the size of that large one. Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I was just going to actually ask you that question. So, we don't need to go over Mexico because you got it. Yeah. So rank size it's kind of a mathematical one. And then primate city would be a country where they have one kind of really large city and then the other ones don't even compare in size. So I'll just ask you Canada oops, I'm going to do this one first. Nope, I'm going to go over because we are not having a chance to do it. Okay. Do we think Canada follows the rank size or primate city rule and why? This one's a little tricky because I don't know if you know that much about Canada, but let's see if we can figure it out. Yes, great. So if you're in the Nearpod there, see if you can attempt the Canada one and then we'll talk about that one quickly. Yes, and so as you're typing the answer there, yes, in the chat, India is neither. That is correct. And India is an example of one that does come up pretty often, that India kind of falls into neither categories. And you're also right that Mexico and Mexico City is a great example of a primate city country because Mexico City is so much larger than any of the other cities. All right, awesome. I see you guys over there in the Nearpod. You totally get it. But Canada does follow the rank size rule. Vancouver is Toronto or Vancouver, largest city, or one of those. I can't remember. But then I do know that the next one is half and then half and then half. Exactly. And a couple people were also making note that it follows the rank size rule because it's a developed country. And so you might be noticing a trend between our developed countries being rank size and LDCs or less developed countries being a primate city. And yes, the US is rank size technically. Yes. I love the use of a picture. Someone put it in the Nearpod. Awesome. Okay. So I was going to do Mexico City, but we already talked about that one, so we don't need to do it now. But I'm going to go back to that short answer one I had right here. So according to the rank size rule, you'll answer in the Nearpod. This is just what the question is. If the largest city in a country is a population of 10 million, what would the next largest city's population be? Should be real quick, real easy one. Go ahead and drop that into the Nearpod because I know you got it. You got it so quick. Yes, you guys are fast. You got it. We got some basic math there. Geniuses. Yeah. All right. 5 million. You figured it out and super quickly. Great job. Basically, it's just half. Awesome. And then, yeah, so the examples that do come up pretty often are India and Mexico City for those two reasons. And I'm glad that you guys also, again, noticed that pattern between developed countries being rank size and less developed countries being primate city. Great job. Okay, we're going to go past there. Okay, I'm going to go past. We already talked about that. Let's get talking about our central place theory. So this comes up a lot in the organization of cities and how business kind of designs itself in order to increase its profit and where to place themselves surrounding a city, surrounding a town and a village and of boundaries. So our central place theory has to do with selecting the right location to basically make the most money. It's a business-based economic theory. So the central place in the central place theory is the market center, where the exchange of goods and services are. And then the area surrounding it, what we call the market area. And then, not surprisingly, and I'm sure you guys have done a lot of work on this in your classes, that people prefer to get services from the nearest location. And so it's the delicate balance between making sure that you are serving the needs of the population, but not being too close to another provider. So you're not overlapping in profitability, and you're making sure that you're placed in a location where you would make the most money. And this would obviously be very different depending on the size of your city. So for example, like I live in New York, like we have, like there's 2 Starbucks, a few blocks down the street from my house, 2 of them that are basically across the street from each other. And in no other place would that make sense, profitability-wise. But someone, I'm sure, at Starbucks headquarters has done the kind of math on it and realized, like, this will actually work because we are kind of our own, each side of the street is almost its own little city and market area with a boundary around it, which sounds crazy. But it has to be able to support itself by people who want that product. And so there is a decision being made between consumption, demand, profitability, and just looking at the location of an area and what surrounds it. So again, at the root of it, this is a theory about people trying to figure out how they can make the most money and where your businesses should be in comparison to who wants it. Oh, I didn't know that about Starbucks. Well, so yeah, so I'm sure then someone had done the math and decided that maybe one of those Starbucks had served maybe 12,000 people a day, which sounds crazy, but let's just say, so then I guess they decided we could split it in 2. But that's wild. Wow, 6,000 a day. Okay. It's a lot of Starbucks. Wow. All right, let's try some central place theory questions, looking at the terms threshold and range, which I didn't even necessarily mention, but I will talk about as we go over the questions, because those are 2 terms or 2 definitions that have to do with the central place theory, is something called a threshold and a range. So try these questions first, and then we'll talk about the definitions after you answer them. But it seems like you already know because everyone is getting these questions correct. So you might already know. Wow, you guys are getting all of these questions right. The Nearpod screen is completely green, which means every question answered is correct. Okay, so most of us are past that first one. So I'm just going to go over G as you're finishing. So according to the central place theory, threshold is the minimum number of people needed to support a service. So that would be what someone commented there in the chat about a Starbucks. So a Starbucks threshold is 6,000 people. So that's how many people they need to come to their store in order to make sense to open another one, which seems crazy high, but they've decided that that's their threshold. And every business would have a different threshold. Okay, and then the next term that comes up is the term range, which is the answer to this one. So it's the maximum distance a customer will travel to acquire that good or services. So how far am I willing to travel to get the thing that I want? which in New York City is not very far, which is why there is 2 Starbucks next door to each other, because I'm not willing to go more than a block, apparently. So that is range. And then lastly here, primate city. Disproportionately large in relation to the next largest city in the country. Thank you, guys. Thanks for answering each other's questions. I'm not sure what you mean by what lesson we're on, but hopefully that comment helped. Awesome. Okay, I'll share your responses over there in the Nearpod, but you guys were pretty solid on central place theory. I know it does come up really often, so I have a feeling you guys might have talked about this a lot already. Okay, let's do this. Okay, let's look more at the models and the structures of cities. Let's get into it. Here we go. Here we go with our models. You knew they were coming. There's so many. There is so many. Hard to keep track of them all, but we will do our best. So some of the main ones we're going to look at here are our concentric. Yes, and I promise I will give you the code for Unit 5 at the end. Sorry, guys. I promise I will. We'll get right to the end and I'll give it to you. So we've got the concentric zone model. We got our sector model, multiple nuclei, galactic or peripheral model, and then urban realms. We'll also look at the Southeast Asian city model as well as the African city model. Okay. So we're going to talk about each one. So another part that we're going to mention, because these terms come up in all of those models, is the CBD, or the Central Business District. That seems to be the main kind of consideration when figuring out how to put these city models together, is where is that Central Business District? We have something called the zones of transition, which are these land use areas in between industry and low-class housing. And then we've got the commuter zone, which would be on the edges of the city, where people commute into the CBD for work. So all of these kind of parts will come up in some of these models here. The Central Business District is in all of them. And then where is that transition zone in between industry and housing? And then where do the people actually live that work in the CBD? All right, let's get rolling on our models. We got so many. Okay, first one. I'm sure you have seen this picture a million times because this model comes up, I think, the most. So we've got our concentric zone model. And so this one is kind of the most simplified version. It looks a little bit like those agricultural layers in the von Thunen model, where it's just concentric circles. And so this one is pretty simplistic. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of considerations that don't really fit into this model because there is no city that's designed in these like perfect concentric circles. But the gist of it, we can still use and modify with some of the other models. So the gist of it is we've got zone 1 right in the center there is the central business district or the market. Like we've seen this kind of model before. Zone 2, we've got industry and poor quality housing. Zone 3, we've got the working class. Zone 4, middle class. And zone 5, just build up area. We're going to go through that. Don't you worry. Yeah, we're going to go through kind of why you'd use some of them, why you'd use others, and kind of what's the purpose of the modified ones. Because a lot of the models that are coming up are modified versions of the concentric zone model because they realize that it doesn't account for a lot of what's happening in the world right now. And it doesn't really make sense anymore. So we've modified these concentric zone models. But for example, this model does work in Chicago, but we'll see in a later model that this has been adapted to kind of re-explain Chicago. But this basic idea still works in some cities, but it's been modified. Because again, there is no real city that exists in these perfect concentric rings where there isn't some kind of blending between these zones. Okay, so again, this is our next one. So this is a somewhat modified version of the one we just looked at because it also is based on Chicago. So it's a city that develops in a series of sectors extending out from the center. So it says kind of like a pie wedge. So we've got low rent areas and high rent areas could extend to the outer edge depending on what's going on. So this model is a little bit better because it accounts for different sectors. It also accounts for why some of these rent areas could extend is if transportation got better. Then maybe these housing areas wouldn't be so concentrated if maybe public transportation got better, or there was a new bus route or light rail or subway. Now maybe these different housing areas could be in different zones if transportation got better. So this model makes a little bit more sense. It shares a lot of the similarities as the other one. We still have the central business district in the center. We still have the low, medium, and high class residential spread out in a similar way. The difference now is just the distance of these housing areas might be larger, and that's because of increased transportation. So you might be able to live a little bit farther out from the center of the city if there's better public transportation. And Chicago has the light rail, I think they call it that. It's sort of that overground subway-ish thing in Chicago where people are able to get back and forth to the central business district a lot easier, so they don't need to live as close to the city. Okay, again, that's our sector model. Next, so this next one, multiple nuclei model, you can see the examples. It works for some of these newer cities like Houston and LA. So this is a city that is a complex structure where there is more than one center. So the only real difference with this one is instead of there being kind of one central business district, there might be several, and or the center of the model, it might not always be a central business district. The center might be something else. So we can think of it as just multiple nodes where then the city surrounds itself. So instead of one center, there's multiple centers. And it says there are some activities that are attracted to a particular node where others try to avoid them. So in one model, the central business district might be in the center. And then in another area, it might be manufacturing that's the center of one area. So multiple centers. And again, this works for newer cities like Houston and LA. Alrighty. We got a lot to get through, so we're flying. All right, so some real world applications. So where does this come up? So in our concentric zone model, we have families in newer houses tend to live in the outer ring, older houses inner ring. In our sector models, the family with the higher income will not live in a same sector as a family with low income. So they're still very much split by income, which is the same as the concentric zone because a newer house would be more expensive than an older house. And in the nuclei model, people with the same ethnic background are likely to live near each other. So people of the same ethnic background might center themselves around one node, and then people of a different ethnic background might center themselves through a different mode. Yeah, the concentric zone model is outdated. Yes, it doesn't super apply as much. We have to kind of adapt it for it to make sense for our modern cities with modern transportation and all these different changes. The basis of it still makes sense, but it doesn't really apply to any particular city very well anymore. Okay. So just like she said there, you guys are on it. So some critics of why this doesn't super make sense. It's too simple, a little bit outdated. And I think the main part there is that there really is no model that's going to be able to explain exactly what's going on in a city and why places are the way they are. Some are just genuine happenstance, a lot of other factors that might not have been considered. And so the solution is, can we kind of combine models and look at, can we use parts of this one and parts of this one to make better sense of it and to adapt to the changes in our city as well as the changing people in the city. And so it says, an example is they suggest that more people prefer to live near others who have similar characteristics, which is true, which none of the models really account for. The models were set up to account for mostly things surrounding business and industry, but maybe that's not why people move to certain places. It has nothing to do with that. They just wanted to be by people that had the same interests as them. They didn't really care where that was. And so none of these really models take that kind of thing into consideration. And so perhaps we need to adapt them and try something else or combine some. All right, we're keeping going. We got more models. We thought we were done. We're not. We have more models. So we've got our galactic city model or the peripheral model. So this is created by, if you can see there, the same person that did the multiple nuclei model. This has a lot to do with the idea of suburbs and how that is set up. And so it says the suburbs spread outward as the downtowns in a lot of major cities have declined. So the downtown, especially in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, the downtown is no longer the place of development. There isn't industry down there. And so that is kind of no longer the hub. And so there is this kind of central districts now that are not in the center of the city that are actually farther out. I would say like Detroit, for an example, it's a lot of these major these old Rust Belt cities that kind of collapsed and are rebuilding. I went to school in Milwaukee in Wisconsin. That is definitely one of these. Detroit was, Cleveland. It's a lot of these old industrial auto heavy cities that kind of had collapsed their downtown and have now the suburbs are the places with the most industry. And I'm sure there's a million other examples. Those are just the ones that kind of come to mind. And so they have many downtowns that we call edge cities, where the majority of the actual action is kind of happening outside the city center now. All right, so that is our galactic city model, the peripheral model. Next one, urban realms model. So it models large 20th century cities. Again, each realm of this model is separate and used for different purposes, and they are linked together to make one large city. An example there, it says it's automobile dependent because people need to be able to go back and forth between these locations. Okay. So like an example of this one, San Francisco is set up this way. Mini cities of themselves. So San Francisco, Raleigh, and parts of Chicago. There we go. My closed captioning went off. Okay. Okay, this is the bid theory model. It's not necessarily it's similar to the other ones, but it has to do more with the rent cost of an area. And so you might have seen this one in the agricultural unit because this often comes up as well. This one's pretty easy in terms of processing it, but it basically just means that the farther you get away from the central market, whether that's the central business district or it's another area, it's just whatever is the center of that city, it would just get more expensive. And so rent is highest in closest proximity to the urban market. So the farther you get away from wherever the center of this city is, the land is cheaper, which I think kind of seems obvious. But that is called the bid rent theory. So if you need a lot of land, you're going to have to get pretty far away from the central business district. Okay, next one. So many models. Latin American cities. So this one is in developing countries, but it follows a similar pattern to European cities because they've been influenced a lot by colonial rule. So the after effects of being colonized is pretty obvious in the way that some of these cities are set up. And so they're built around a core central business district, similar to a lot of the other models, with a central plaza. And then there's a commercial spine, or kind of a stretch that comes out of it, surrounded by elite housing, which is where a lot of probably the colonizers, that's where they lived. And then it's surrounded by 3 areas of housing that decrease in quality. So you would have the central business district, and then you'd have the colonizers in kind of the fancy housing, pretty close to that, and then surrounded by the native housing that decreases in quality. And again, this is kind of a remnant of colonization. Okay. Okay. And then we have our Southeastern Asian cities model, which is sort of similar, where it's influenced by old colonization. So in this one, there's no central business district, but it is kind of set up surrounding a port or some sort of water harbor area. And then we have a commercial zone, a westernized commercial zone, industry, etc. And again, this is in South Asian cities, and it's primarily, it's because of an old harbor or colonial port, westernized commercial zone, and then housing on the outside. For the one beforehand, yes. For the Southeastern Asian one, no. But yes to the prior one. Yeah, you got it. Okay, and then I think this is our last model. There's just so many. Sub-Saharan African city model. So in this one, we have 3 central business districts, the colonial one, the traditional one, and the market zone. So this is set up again because of a history of colonialization. And so that's why we would have the colonial central business district, the traditional one, and then our market zone. And so all of those last 3 examples, Latin American, Southeast Asian, and the Sub-Saharan Africa, all of these just have remnants of colonialization and were designed in a way that was not for the people, the local people that actually live there. And so when these countries are no longer colonized, they're finding their way back to making this city setup work for them, or even reinventing the way that their city is designed, because the model might no longer serve the needs of the city. All right, let's do some practice. We got a lot of questions for this one. I'm going to give you some time because there was a lot of models there. So let's see if we can practice some of these. Again, this one will have to go very fast, unfortunately, but we'll definitely give you, if you join that review code afterwards, you'll have a lot more time to go through these and actually read the questions, but we're going to have to fly through it a smidge. But you got it. Okay. Just a lot to remember with all of these models, but you guys are a pretty good start over there. I'm just going to kind of go through them as I see you finishing each question. So it looks like most people have done number 1. So I'll quickly talk about those and so forth. So for the Galactic City model, I think it'll help if you remember that it's also called the peripheral model. It's the same model. And so the periphery to me means outside or outside of the city center. The whole reason that model was set up is to describe what's going on outside of the city center, which is what we call exurban, or outside of even the suburbs. Because periphery to me means really outside of a central area. And exurban is a way of saying that it's even outside of the suburbs, which is peripheral to me. So that's how I remembered that one. Number 2 here, an advantage of the multiple nuclei model over the concentric zone model and the sector model is that it easily incorporates construction of a new airport on the urban periphery. And that's just because there are several different nuclei or several different nodes. That means there's a lot of empty space on the outskirts of all of these and in between. So you have a lot more industrial and open districts than there would be if you just had one city center. But that might be a great example of a question to throw in the Q&A for Harrison, because those are kind of tricky. A lot of these questions are. All right. You guys are doing pretty good in the Nearpod, though. You guys got this. Okay, which of the following models best represents an old colonial port? That's that one we just talked about. I know we got this one. That's a South Asian city model. That's the only one that is designed around a port. Water-based model. This is our only one. Okay, which of the following depicts a commercial spine bordered by an elite residential section? So this, to me, the description of that implies that it is a colonial, one of the colonial models. And that is my Latin American city model. And then this one, so according to the sector model, members of low income groups tend to live in what parts of the city? Okay, and this one, the linear residential areas radiating from the city center outward. So that's kind of the point of the sector model, is that these housing sectors go all the way from the center and then all the way to the outskirts. Okay, so let me share your responses over in the Nearpod. Okay. All right, so we will just quickly talk about density and land use. This one's pretty clear. We have rural, suburbs, and urban. One is low density, one is low to medium, one is high. I just want to get to our sustainability stuff here. Let me go past this. I'm going past that. Okay, infrastructure. The importance really of infrastructure is that it allowed city centers and all these different models to adapt and to change. And so without basic transportation and improved infrastructure, these different city models kind of wouldn't exist. And so the better your city's transportation and the more opportunity people have to move within the city, even without having cars, allows these different city models to change and to adapt. People can live in different neighborhoods. You no longer have to live near the central business district or the market in order to kind of have your city thrive. So it's changing all of these models, and it's changing the way that we view cities and the needs of cities. So the focus for lots of cities as of late has been on infrastructure. And so as people are living farther out from the main city center, how can we design ways to make that urban space functional, and how can we make it easy for people to get to the markets, to get what they need, and how can we also make this sustainable and environmentally friendly? Okay, so that's what we're going to look at here towards the end, is what can we do to make this whole world a little bit better, especially knowing what's happening with the growth of cities and how people are living farther away. People have different needs and desires, and how can we kind of redesign our cities and rework them so that it serves all of our populations. So we have these terms that come up. So we've got new urbanization. So this is the idea of designing spaces so that the city and residential areas are walkable, so that we can kind of lower our need for automobiles, for parts of public transportation. If you design your city and you design your market zones in walkable areas, can we change what a city looks like and how a city operates? We have a movement for green belts, which is this area of actual green or a park or grass or some sort of open land that building is restricted, so we can kind of incorporate nature and space back into our cities. And can that be maybe part of the design of a city model? Maybe one of those sectors can be a green zone now or a green belt. And I think the major one is that cities are growing much slower than they were before. So how can we figure out how to design what we want in a city and what cities look like? Okay. So some things that they are concerned about over here is the reduction of sprawl. So people want areas and markets to be closer so that you don't have to commute to them, so that you can bike ride to them or walk or just take like a light rail or the subway. We don't have to drive everywhere. We don't have to design highways and things like that. And then some criticisms, of course, is this idea of gentrification, loss of character and of culture, increased housing costs. So we'll briefly now look at some of the criticism in terms of what's happening to neighborhood. Sprawl is just widening. So if you want to reduce the sprawl, that means you want to centralize people. So you don't want people living so spread out from each other. You actually want to bring them back together again so that you're living a little bit closer to each other so things can be more walkable. They're trying to discourage the spreading out of people, because then now you all have to drive your car. I'm going to actually go past that quiz there. So if you are on the Nearpod and you wanted to do some of these quiz questions we might run out of time for, that's when you got that review code. Go ahead and go back and do that. I'm going to go past these again. You will have the opportunity to go back through those if you'd like. I just want to make sure we get through some of this stuff. So some of our challenges here, that's what I was trying to get to, are these terms that you've definitely heard them before, but are criticisms of when we try and redesign our cities, even if we're doing them to the best of our abilities, what are some problems that are happening and some kind of unexpected consequences of these redesigns? And so one of the main ones there on our list is this housing discrimination and all of these kind of issues that come up when we're redesigning housing areas. So we have the concept of redlining. And this is the idea of economically keeping families out of neighborhoods by restricting opportunities or access to loans. And so therefore you cannot buy a house. Blockbusting, sort of similar, is dissuading people, encouraging others to flip and make a profit while keeping the housings very segregated and divided. And just the general idea of gentrification in general. So the process of middle-class people moving into deteriorated inner city neighborhoods, which in theory is a pro because you are renovating an area that had maybe been abandoned. You're trying to bring people and life back into abandoned downtown. But also the criticism is it could be destroying culture, destroying access for people who originally lived in that neighborhood to be able to stay in that neighborhood. I'm sure you've heard of a lot of the criticisms of gentrification. It comes up a lot here in New York constantly with different groups of people moving into disenfranchised neighborhoods and kind of taking up spots where the local residents are no longer able to afford. So again, this is just idea of gentrification and some of the pros and cons. So again, what gentrification means really is people moving into deteriorated inner city areas. So this is very common in places where the central business district has somewhat fallen apart and has been left somewhat abandoned. And so people are moving in, redesigning, but often tearing things down, making improvements, but the end result is going to be a more expensive neighborhood. So there's definitely some pros and cons, lots of arguments around gentrification. Okay. We are going to keep going again through these quizzes. I'm sorry time got to us, but if you want to try these questions, just hop onto that review code at a later date and give it a whirl. So lastly, some of our challenges. So how do we maintain cities? What problems can they cause? How do we reinvent a city to not destroy our planet and to continue to work for us? So one of the main issues, and that term that had came up before, is this idea of sprawl. And so the more people are spread out, the more kind of difficult it is for central business districts to maintain their profitability. That means more roads are needed, more people driving, more pollution, more congestion, all of the above. Sanitation and climate change, again, that all comes with more people driving and moving. And just the large ecological footprint of cities. So just how much a city just itself kind of wreaks havoc on nature. So that means everything from drainage and water usage to pollution and heat deserts and all of these kind of just general issues that urbanization can cause for our environment. And how can we kind of be smarter about how we design our urban spaces? So here are some potential solutions. They really should rename them because it doesn't seem exciting to me to name something a brown field and a gray field. I think they need to revamp those names. But it's the idea of redeveloping formerly abandoned areas. So a lot of these commercial and industrial districts are not really in use anymore. We don't have as many factories or production plants or manufacturing zones. And so how can we retake back these commercial and industrial spaces and make it something beneficial, make it something environmentally friendly, and then prevent potential problems down the road and kind of reclaim those spaces that have been abandoned or perhaps even contaminated. And so as all of this is just as we are redesigning our cities, and as they're changing and growing, can we just be smarter and more thoughtful about how we redesign our spaces? So we don't inadvertently keep destroying the environment. We make sure that everyone has access to housing and to fair policies and practices, and to make sure everyone has the ability to get what they need in a way that doesn't continue to contribute to some of these problems. I'm going to go past those also. So sorry, you can go back through those. And our next one there. So again, please write down that self-paced code if you haven't already. If you would like to go back through this at any point, I'm going to type right now in the chat the code for Unit 5 because everyone was asking about that. So let me just stop sharing really quick and I'm going to get that code for you guys. And then hopefully you already wrote down this one. Let me just get that one for you from last time. One sec. Sorry, I have to bring that up. If you're good to go, you're good to go, but I want to make sure I get you guys that code from last week. I think I told Harrison. Let me grab it. And then again, keep voting there in the chat if there's any questions you wanted to go over or to ask him about. But let me give you guys the code. Sorry, I had to go back, scroll, and find it for last week. Here it is. Okay. It is X. Thank you guys. X9CDP. So if you go back through the Nearpod, there is just there's a lot more quiz questions that we didn't get to. The code I just put in the chat there, that is from last time because people are asking about Unit 5. But there's always more quizzes and more activities in those Nearpods for you to go back through and spend some more time reading because we just usually don't have time to go through each question. Someone asked, oh, thank you. Thanks, Andy. I was just going to find that. Thank you, guys. Andy just go ahead. She posted Unit 3 there for you. And those are the self-paced codes, and they are up till the end of May. So anytime you want to go back through those, you can. All right, then. Thank you guys so much. You guys have a great day. Thank you. Thank you. And have a great rest of your Saturday and your weekend. And hopefully you're less stressed next time. Bye, guys. Have a great day. Bye.